I'm going to talk about tales of two modernities. We have talked about modernity, the concept, before a few times, but I want to introduce this new twist to it, and it fits neatly in earlier distinction between modernity as a negative concept and modernity as a positive concept. And I'm going to go back to that concept, and I'll try to develop this tale of a tale of two modernities, Kantian versus Cartesian, um, from that earlier distinction which we made. So that distinction is we developed it earlier, but this idea of Kantian versus Cartesian, the basic idea I got it from Robert Pippin in his critique of Habermas's critique of Hegel. My discussion has nothing to do with Hegel at this point, or doesn't have anything to do with Robert Pippin's debate with Habermas. But he starts his essay on Habermas's critique of Hegel by alluding to this, and I'm going to develop it in my own way. Not everything I'll develop it, will fit neatly into Robert Pippin's ideas. So I'll just wanted to give him credit for that, but I don't want to, attribute how I will develop it to him. So that's my cat's trying to come in. Sorry. So modernity, we said, we defined it earlier, and you can go back. I'll put the link in below if you want to watch those videos. But and by the way, this is the idea I'm trying to develop here for the first time. So this is just an introduction. It need to be developed. So it's very raw at the moment. So as I said, modernity earlier. We define modernity as a system or civilization, if you will, which emerges in northwestern Europe, starting to emerge in 16, 17, and it flourishes in 19th and 20th century, and it breaks with what was before, that is, breaks with the feudal system, and basically it breaks with Christian civilization, medieval Christian civilization. So it doesn't reject everything there, but it rejects the core of Europe as a, Christendom or Christian civilization. The Christian religion and all that stays, but Christian civilization and feudalism was part of it, was rejected, and some new systems and new ideas and new institutions were placed. So one thing which we said earlier was that when we try to understand any revolution, including civilizational revolutions, we can divide that into two parts, negative, and negative always comes first, and then you have positive. So negative consists in rejecting what exists or which existed. And a lot of people might be against the present for different reasons. So once that is rejected, then a totally new phase starts, which is already there. Otherwise, that negative thing is not going to be successful. But once you have rejected the existing system, then you have competing ideas about what to put in its place. what to put in its place. So it happens with every revolution and civilizational revolution. Obviously, it happens a lot in more complex way. So once you have rejected an existing civilization, then people are going to try to put different things, and a new mixture or complex will emerge. So that's why I always say that when we discuss about these things, what we are discussing is ideal types. We are not discussing reality. We are just trying to give you a model for all that, so you can go back and look in at detail and try to understand them. So the positive, there were different movements. Some were Christian, some were non-Christians, mainly secular. Some were anti-religion, some were more reconciliatory to religion. Some were more, metaphysical, epistemological. Others were more political and social. So it is in this context that I'm going to talk about the tales of two modernity. So it is in this positive context that I'm going to talk about these two tales of two modernities. Obviously, these two, I'm not, anyway, I shouldn't make too many qualifications, but they are themselves part of what ideas. So I'm not describing here reality or anything. Okay, let's go. So once you have rejected, so then you have positive aspects. So one, I'm saying Cartesian, and the other in Kantian. Now these two are not entirely separate, because you can't think of Kant without Descartes, but what Descartes proposed in essence was, and what Kant proposed was not totally different thing, but two different directions. And I think eventually Kant is more revolutionary and more in tune with what actually happened in political, moral, and organizational side, and probably Descartes is more relevant to the epistemological and scientific side, although separating those side in this way is also an abstraction. Okay, so let's start with Cartesian version of what. So if we look at the negative side, Descartes is very relevant because his famous rejection of the traditional educational system by claiming that it was a unreliable system, because it contained truth and error together, and it was very hard to be sure about what was true and what was false, and the whole method was vague, etc. And Descartes' method of doubt is very relevant in that, because what he is doubting is the existing system and he announces his method that I'm going to doubt anything which I can doubt. So the criterion for rejection is very thin, in the sense that whatever you can even possibly doubt, you must reject it. So whatever you can actually and then once you have raised this whole, erased the existing foundation, then you will start anew with a new criterion. You will, at least at the foundational level, you will accept only what is absolutely certain. So you will make a new start, new beginning, and that gels well with the whole notion of modernity. And as everybody knows, what was left of Descartes' doubt was his own thinking and doubting self. So the self, and that self became part of a new philosophical movement, which I don't want to rehearse that, but which was developed in two different ways in British empiricism through Locke, Berkeley, and Hume. And on the other hand, you had continental rationalism. You have Leibniz and people like Spinoza, especially Spinoza, because basically the whole philosophy of Spinoza was the development of Cartesian notion of substance. And then Kant came and he sort of tried to combine these two traditions. So in that sense, Kant is also related to this tradition. And this self, the thinking self, is the only anchor which is left after the Cartesian doubt. And this self is going to provide us foundation for our new modernity, at least in epistemological and methodological arenas. So That was the Cartesian modernity, and there are some um, um, characteristics which emerge from what we just said of this Cartesian modernity. So it's looking for a new certainty, an absolute certainty. And it finds this certainty not in God, even though God is involved in his argument. God is just an instrument of certainty, but in his own self. Eventually, it's this individual self. So, and this self is a substance in the sense that it is the thing which only self-subsisting thing, and from there it establishes God and then material being. And basically you have really this self and the material world, and there's a whole new scientific epistemological dynamic between this self and the material world. So it's and the self try to know this material world on itself, and eventually try to understand it and manipulate it, whatever. So in general, Cartesian modernity is epistemological, and it is scientific. So it deals with knowledge and problem matter related to it, and it's scientific. And obviously through science it's related to the whole economic and social system, but on its own it's not. On the other hand, Kant's, although as I said, Kant belongs to Cartesian tradition as well, but even in his theoretical work in Critique of Pure Reason, Kant's modernity doesn't start with a doubt, because I guess that doubt has already been has accomplished what it had to. But on the other hand, the concept which neither nor certainty, the concept Kant's modeled his whole empire, theoretical, practical, as well as his aesthetic judgment. His trilogy is on freedom, and each of his three influential, radical, revolutionary critiques are based on a particular conception of freedom, and eventually they are anchored in a conception of freedom which they all shared. So with freedom, Kant give us so for Descartes you had substance and self, and it was the problem of knowledge. But with the introduction of freedom as the primary concept, this substance becomes subject. This self becomes subject. So self is the self-centeredness or concentration of self is similar in both, but the leading idea for Descartes is substance. On the other hand, the leading idea for substance and so that's self-subsisting, and it's the seat of knowledge and action or whatever. But on the other hand, for Kant, it becomes subject because the problem is the problem of freedom, not of knowledge, and even knowledge is based on the possibility of freedom. And this introduction of freedom changes the game in the sense that although both are talking about self and both are talking about reason, but reason here is related to freedom in Kant. So what Kant is talking about is not primarily about knowledge, but primarily about autonomy, primarily about autonomy of reason. That's freedom, because as we said before, in freedom you have negative aspects. You reject what is outside you, guiding you, and positive, you base guidance in yourself. So this is the positive conception which Kant give us is autonomy of reason. Autonomy of reason, autonomy of self, and even knowledge presupposes that autonomy. So basically in all three critiques, Kant is talking about autonomy of reason. The only thing is that the type of reason and type of freedoms are slightly different, but they all presuppose autonomy of reason. And autonomy of reason means that reason as a self-legislator. So Cartesian self was seeker of truth. So here you are not seeking truth primarily, you are seeking autonomy, and autonomy is where you make reason the sole legislator and since reason is self, that's what autonomy is. So it's not about truth, it is about autonomy, it is about self determination, and that's what makes knowledge, morality, and sound social systems, aesthetic judgment possible. So this modernity, so not truth, that's Cartesian. Autonomy of reason. And autonomy of reason requires, in the negative sense, it requires us to reject the legislation of anyone else. Legislations of anything which is non-reason, not just anti-reason, but non-reason. So that can be our animal nature as well as God. As far as it is not our own self which is dictating it. So that's and once you have rejected that, that's coming out of immaturity. That's what enlightenment is. And then once you have rejected that, and then you do legislation for the reason, legislation its own rules, its own way, its own path, depending on what path we are talking about, theoretical, practical. And only autonomous reason can, have correct knowledge. Only autonomous reason can have morality, access to morality, and only autonomous reason can have aesthetic judgment, which are sound. So Kant, Descartes, Kant. So you have doubt, Descartes, doubt, and you get self. But self is a substance which seeks truth, and basically truth is the material world is totally separate, so you try to relate to it, try to capture it, whatever. For Kant, on the other hand, doubt, etc., doubt, he doesn't go through that as such, but obviously he presupposes a lot of Descartes. So you have self, but the self is not a substance, it's a subject, and that's because of freedom, notion of freedom. What we need is autonomy of reason. And it is autonomy of our reason which makes us autonomous as individuals. So you have your individual morality, your kingdom of ends, and then society, and then a state. So these are two different paths, compatible, overlapping, but it's entirely different in the sense that Kant has much more comprehensive effect on not just on epistemology but on social and political scene, and also on the state level, etc., and the whole civilization. So in a sense, we are living in a Kantian civilization, as much as we when we talk about democracy, when we talk about individual freedoms and human rights and all that, and when we talk about international relations and liberal states, etc., liberal order, international liberal order, globalization, there's more to the Kantian paradigm. On the other hand, Cartesian influences more on actual sciences and philosophy, etc. Okay, so I think that's was interesting, and there are a lot of this needs to be developed more. So we will make more videos on this. So I just want to develop it, introduce it. Sorry. Okay, thank you.